Still learning this stuff. Hey guys, welcome to the show. I'm loving what Not Jay did for that intro. I'm sorry. I every week I just head bop to it. It's catchy. Yeah. Obviously, we've got superstar with us with David Thompson. But before we get into too much, I just want to give you a quick update. I've downloaded all the games, and I'm putting together a PDF that I can send off to the Dietz Foundation so we can get published. I'm waiting for a couple of games that had makeovers from Niels, and obviously we want to have those in the publication. So once I get those, I'll send that off to the Dietz Foundation. So I'm low-key, as you know, that's kind of how I work. And second, I noticed we got a couple of more people that entered in the current game jam, which is a card design. No pressure, David. You do it. You don't. But and I don't know if you know, but I'm going to be running because I've been a ton of requests. We were talking a little earlier about how this kind of is a life of its own. And with the Dietz Foundation, they were like, hey, if you do this every year, we could try to publish something every year on the postcards. And the plan is that I would do the postcards basically starting in December, going 6 months. And I've expanded it to Christmas cards. So kind of double the size, gives you a little more space. And I'll talk about a design I'm going to work on based off of your Undaunted series, which, by the way, I totally love. Yeah, I think I gave you a clue a while back what I wanted to do. And I'm going to make my own little series and call it Daunted.
Oh, nice. Yeah, of course.
So I'm going to play off that a little bit. But that's going to start December 1st. And then every 6 months after that will be our second jam. This one's a card-driven game. I'm going to leave that theme open to whatever we kind of want to do each year. And we'll dive into this a little later, but one of them might be a book game that you publish for KDP. And, you can do what you want design-wise, as long as it fits into the format that can be published on KDP. But so unless you've got last-minute changes, just email me directly, go on Discord, let me know, because probably in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to finalize what I'm going to send off to the Dietz Foundation. And it's going to be what it's going to be. Okay. So with that kind of bookkeeping or office work done, I want to introduce David Thompson with us tonight. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. It is a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.
It's
really cool. We've been talking about it for a while now, so it's nice to do it.
Yeah, you were traveling, you were doing some things with the family, and then I was telling you earlier, my daughter graduated, so I had some things going on there, and so I just kind of, last month was crazy work-wise for me, because obviously we don't do this as professional. Well, technically, I guess you're a professional, but I know you have a day job, or at least I believe you do.
Yeah. It's like somewhere between a hobby and a second job. I don't know what you'd call it.
I'd call it a second job. I mean, I was to get myself prepared, I was looking at some of the other games you had designed, and you have done quite a bit of work, not just in the wargaming area, but I've noticed you've done a couple of games, for lack of a better term, in the hobby board gaming space.
Yeah.
And I would like to have you elaborate on that, but I will say one thing. I really appreciate some of the games that you've done in the wargaming space take on a lot of the mechanics or the verbiage of what board gamers are used to hearing. And I think that this is just me. I am inspired by that because I think that that's it's a much larger market. And if we can bring people into this niche that we happen to love, that teaches history, and I mean, there's all sorts of things. And I think in time, it'll expand beyond war games. And you're seeing things like Votes for Women, as an example, is kind of a historic based game, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that by bridging the war game and the board game communities, these types of topics become more viable with both communities. And I'm not going to get into a deep rant about all of that stuff. I think games are games. I love games. I've been doing games since I was a kid, like 10. But obviously, this isn't about me. I want to talk to you about some of the things you've been doing, but I wanted to set kind of some guidelines as far as feel free to talk about non-wargaming stuff, even though this is a postcards from the front. And we're definitely going to talk about your battle cards because you've been teasing on Twitter some images, and I kind of want to get a little inside scoop, if possible, on where you're going with that. So I've thrown a bunch out there. Feel free to latch on to any of those and dive a little deeper if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So I would say totally agree. I guess the thing that you said that resonates with me the most, the thing that I think is probably most important, big picture, is when you mentioned like votes for women and the idea of historical gaming, not just war gaming, but historical gaming. So, we have tons of games in the broader hobby board game space that, Puerto Rico or whatever, right? They'll have a place name and a time period or whatever. And I mean, truthfully, those are just largely pasted on themes, if you will, right?
Yeah.
But in recent years, I think we've seen more and more non-kinetic war game style historical games. And we've always had them. We've had 1960, etc. And of course, Mr. President just came out and things like that.
Yeah.
But, when I look back a lot at the last 2 years, I've got four games stand out to me in the last 2 years. So those 4 games are Votes for Women, Stonewall Uprising, Halls of Hegra, and Land and Freedom. So 2 of those are war games, and 2 of those are what I would call like historical games, right? And when it comes to me personally, I don't really care for non-historical war, like sci-fi and stuff, those kind of games. To me, those are thematic games. When I think of war games, I think of historical war games. And so I personally would love to see historical wargaming be a part of a larger genre of gaming that is serious historical gaming, and us just agree that, hey, look, we're just going to expand the sphere of gaming that we're in and be inclusive of games like Votes for Women, instead of having these debates when the CSRs or the Charles Roberts Awards or the Board Game Geek Awards about whether Votes for Women should be included, right? Which happened in both of those. And it's like, let's stop debating about whether it should be included and embrace the fact that it's an amazing game that does a fantastic job of conveying, history and is a good game to boot, instead of having a pasted on theme of some historic topic. So yeah, I think of all the things you said that, that has nothing to do with me, right? Because
yes.
Okay.
Let me stop you there. I think it has something to do with you in the sense that you're a bit of an icebreaker in that area, in my opinion, because of the games that you're doing that are bridging from, let's say, the hex encounter to the board game. I think is creating some acceptability that's going to allow for that space to exist for Votes for Women, for example. So I think don't diminish your impact, my friend. I think that you're leading some of that.
For sure. I mean, the place that I fit is, as you said, I sort of straddle the worlds of wargaming and the broader hobby board gaming world, right? And I've said this, publicly many times. Undaunted, which is probably the foremost well-known of those games. It could have been a game for nobody, or it could have been a game that was a hybrid game that successfully straddled the two, right? And it was kind of threading the needle about which of those two it was going to become, all right? Because it could have been a game that the war gamers were like, hey, this isn't a war game, and hobby gamers were like, this is too much combat, and nobody plays it, right? Yeah. And I've been super blessed and lucky, and there's a lot of things that go into that. It's not just the game design, it's the art and the production and all of those things that allow it to be successful. But that's sort of where I live, or, I always say that the best compliment I can receive is that a war gamer comes up to me and says, thanks for making a game that I can play with my non-war gaming spouse or child or, friend, right? And like you said, bring them into our hobby.
Yeah, I agree with you there are a lot of and I don't mean this in a bad way. I love that people are creative and come up with ideas and put the time and energy into designing games at various levels, um, from hobbyists to somebody at your level, which is maybe a semi-professional. I mean, I would say you're a professional, but obviously it's not what you do 24/7, right? It's probably in your brain while you're doing your day job.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, right? Don't tell our bosses, but we
Yeah.
see games everywhere,
Sure.
right? I mean, that's what designers
Yep.
do. But um, I think that there are a lot of games where people come up with a theme and they are a mechanic. Oh, I want to make a set collection game, or I want to make a worker placement game, and then they try to come up with a skin to wrap around it. Oh, it's settling islands in the Pacific. It's pirates collecting gold. It's whatever. And again, I don't want to diminish anybody's efforts, because this is not trivial what we do as designers. And everybody loves their own babies. Mothers think that their ugly babies are beautiful. It's what we do. And I have some ugly children that I think are just the most, and I'm talking about my games, not my actual daughters. They're gorgeous. But I think, to your point, they're not historic in nature. They're about playing a game with your friends that really doesn't have an impact. It doesn't teach you anything. Not that every game needs to teach you anything. Okay, let me just put that out there. But to your point, I think that having historic games like Votes for Women, and there are a few others, and I'm sorry I don't have them off the top of my head. I should know more. But I'm loving the fact that there's now a space where these early games are going to be, again, I'm going to use the term icebreakers, right? In 5 years from now, we're going to see games about topics that you question, I never thought that could be a game. And I think that that's where we're going with some of the stuff that you're working on and some of the other designers out there in this space. And so, I applaud you for that, because it's, I think it takes, and I'm not going to get hyperbole and say, oh, you're so brave. I think it's, the timing is such, especially with the ability to publish games has dropped, where you don't have to pitch an idea to a publisher that says, I don't think that's going to make money. I think those barriers to some degree are gone. I don't know. You're in the trenches. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. I mean, I 100% agree with what you're saying. And if you think about, Liz Davidson and I, so Liz is, she does a YouTube channel and a podcast called Beyond Solitaire, right? And so we're doing a game about the Night Witches, right? So if I had gone to Avalon Hill or SPI, whatever, 4 decades ago, and said, hey, let's make a game about, Soviet female night bomber pilots, that's not going to fly. I don't think they're not going to fly. It's not going to fly. That's right. Yeah, yeah. But you're right. I mean, we're in. We can debate about sales figures for war games in the 70s versus now. But in terms of what's available to us, we are absolutely in a golden age of historical games and war games, right?
Yeah.
And there's the publishers are there that can produce games at 3,000 copies and still make a profit. So, when we have an idea that's an original idea, it can be a viable game for sure.
Oh, totally agree. So I could probably do the whole show on this topic, but I really want to kind of get some of your thoughts on I'm going to reel it in a little, because this, again, maybe we'll have you back at some other point and we can do a deeper conversation on historical games and what your thoughts might be on how we can move that needle a little bit in that direction, because I'm a big fan of that. I'm working on it's a war game, but it's Coast Watchers. And that's a story that I've not seen anything done on, and I've done some research on it, and I just find it amazing what has been going on in that particular part of the war in the Pacific. And I'm going to do it as a choose your own adventure style game. I have an affinity for that ever since my days of playing Tunnels and Trolls as a kid. So,
Yeah.
But I kind of want to get into. I was talking to you earlier, and I said that I woke up one Saturday morning and my phone was buzzing with activity on Twitter, and it had to do with the fact that you had announced that you had entered into the Postcards from the Front game jam. And I literally had to check to make sure I was not in some sort of hallucination or daydream. So what inspired you to get involved with our little jam?
Well, so first of all, I think when was the jam announced?
December
Originally.
8th, I think, officially.
Okay, so here's the deal. So for my day job, I'm a Department of Defense civil servant. Okay, and so I work for the DoD, and so what I'm sure this is true regardless of where you work. But so every year, at the end of the year, I have what we call use or lose leave, right? Vacation time.
Okay.
So usually I don't actually take. I'm a horrible person that I don't take leave like I should or vacation time during the year. So at the end of the year, I'm forced to take time off, right? And so what that means is I usually have 2 weeks at the end of the year that I can do stuff with, and obviously most people are spending the holidays doing holiday stuff with their family, and so that's a time where everything, my day job, even board game design, kind of takes a lull. And so I was like, oh, this looks like a really interesting thing. I'm going to have some free time around the holidays. This sounds awesome. And the key thing for me about the design jam is the constraints that were on it, right? So for sure, I think I do my best work when I have constraints to start with, right? If you said, Dave, go design a game and you can do whatever you want, well, then I will just never design a game. That's not going to happen, right? It has to have some sort of constraint there to begin with. And so, I had never done anything like it, right? Like I had never done, a postcard size game. And so I was like, this is an interesting constraint. I'll have some, and I don't often have free time. Usually I've got quite a few projects that are on, have been commissioned or on contract and have deadlines. And so it just, all the stars aligned. And I probably, I think before I decided definitively to join up, I reached out to Nils and said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Would you be interested in collaborating? And when he said, yeah, I think that was the final, like, oh, okay, this is a real thing, we can make this happen.
Excuse me. And as I remember, you had put a pretty long post where you went, I think, from conception to completion in like 10 days or something like that. Am I exaggerating?
Something like that. I mean, we worked pretty quickly. And so just kind of a brief overview of what it was is I reached out to Nils on Twitter and I said, hey, and so we'll talk about Nils Johansson. So illustrator, graphic designer, game designer. We had previously worked together on Lansworth Ridge, which is the game I did with DVG. And so Nils is, I would submit, and you and I chatted super briefly about this. I think that Nils is certainly he's one of the best illustrators in the war game space.
Yes.
And I think he's probably one of the most underrated illustrators in gaming, period. He's just super talented. I love working with him. And so, so when I reached out to him and said, he said, yeah, let's do something. I had thought, I'll do something as sort of not a lark, but like I'll do like a hex and counter game, because people always talk about how there is a world of people who say I've never actually made a war game in my life, right? Because
oh my God,
games I make aren't war games, and so that's fine. It doesn't bother me, but there is that group of people, and so I was like, oh, maybe I'll just make a traditional hex and counter game or point to point game or whatever. But when I reached out to Nils, I think he had been thinking about possibly doing something himself, and so he sent me back like a sketchy, like a map for a market garden game. And I was like, oh, well, here we go. We can do this. And so we basically took his map and we took some of the concepts I had for how units would work and be activated and stuff like that. And we could just kind of kludge those together. So it came together very fast, right? In terms of the idea. And so, yeah, there was a Twitter thread, and it actually exists as a BGG post too on the Battle Card Market Garden BGG entry, where it is, I guess you call it almost like a design diary, right? As posted through a Twitter thread, where I just walk through like, hey, this is what we did, and one thing that was really interesting is we spent a decent amount of time up front brainstorming, conceptualizing, deconstructing what a market garden game would have to be a game, right? So we had like a bullet pointed list, and we said, okay, it can be as abstract as we want it to be. It could be a 5-minute game or a 10-minute game, but to be market garden, it has to have these things, right? And so we did spend that time up front. In the game, I think still evokes all those things, but at the very end, when we had essentially completed the design, no matter how many times I played it, and it's a relatively straightforward game, I had a sense of the probabilities of winning, right? And so in the game, you're playing the allies, and winning is getting 30 core to Arnhem. I had a sense of it, and I probably could have brute forced mathed it out in a very simplistic way, but even then, I wouldn't have been super confident in it. And so I reached out on Twitter and I asked, hey, is there anybody that would be willing to help me out with some coding for this game, specifically for that? Because for me, the game is, if a person only vaguely knew of Market Garden, we want this game to show them why it was so hard for the allies to be successful, right? That's what we really want the game to convey. And so in order to do that, I needed to really make sure that I had, the probabilities correct and everything. And so Michael Tiller helped us out with that. He coded it up, and not only did he code it, and I provided him some strategies to use and stuff like that. And he gave me some outcomes, but he also provided me an interface where I could adjust the CRT on the fly and say, nice. Okay, well, if we tweak this number one way or the other, or if we do this, this result's slightly different, what are the actual long-term implications to the win percentage of the game? And that was really, it provided me the confirmation that I needed that, my suspicions were accurate, but also gave us a lot of flexibility in testing the game and refining the game. But yeah, that was a really long way of saying that. Yeah, it was about 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that.
That's a lot of activity for 10 days, my friend. Seriously.
I work, I work in like spurts, right? So I oftentimes will have a lot of projects going on, but one of them will kind of become the primary focus, either because it's just what I want to work on, or a deadline is looming, or whatever. And so it just happened that period I was able to spend all that time on.
So a bit of a perfect storm in the design sense. Yeah. Then. So one thing that I find interesting, and it's the level that you go to, even in, dare I say, a trivial design. I mean, a postcard game, right? There's no expectation of income. It's an exercise of, hey, this looks like it might be fun. But you still apply some of your principles of, I wanted to, as you said, I want certain things in the game to happen to represent what historically is viable. And to also, what you said was, if somebody doesn't know anything about Market Garden, I want them to experience something about it, learn something about maybe the difficulty that the allies had. So it might get somebody to do a little further research into that topic, and then come back and really appreciate the design that you've done. And I think that as designers, if you're listening to this, take this as a point that even in a small design, David has taken a philosophy that he uses on, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is this is a philosophy that runs through most of your designs, is you want to teach history to some level with the games that you design, even something that is, relatively speaking, trivial in a postcard game that might have 100 people, 200 people have exposure to it. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, the only thing I would say is I always definitely go in with a design goal. Now, like in this game, the design goal was, like you said, like it's an abstraction of Market Garden to convey the challenge of the allies. if it's one of my solitaire war games, like the ones I do with DVG, it's almost always to really reflect the historic situation, right? So to put the player in that position. Sometimes with like a game like Undaunted, while inspired by the history, that game might have a slightly different design goal. Like that game might be how do I both model a platoon but also provide a game that is accessible to a broader audience, right? So each game, I would say that the only slight tweak I would say is that I start with hey, here's the design goal of the game, the design intent, and I think that's super important because there's no place to necessarily write that in the rule book, right? But I always try, as a player, to think, what was the design intent for the designer for this game, and experience the game from that perspective. Because it might be that you're coming at the game with something you might be expecting or hoping for, or whatever, something that's very different from what the designer intended when they created the game. And that might be why you might not be getting out of it what you were hoping to.
That's interesting, because now one of the things that I really like in rule books are designer notes, because it kind of, to your point, it's not in the rules, but if you can have that as a designer note, then somebody can get a kind of an idea of where your mindset is and what you're trying to get across. And then it helps you as a player, in my opinion, to say, okay, I expected X, I've got Y. Oh, but now I understand why I have Y. Okay, that was a Freudian slip, maybe, I don't know. The point being is it helps as a player to put you in the mindset of the designer, at least in the sense of what the expectation is for you as a player that the designer is trying to convey, or the lesson or the knowledge that they're trying to put across. And so I think that's why I gravitate towards designer notes. Because I think it allows us as players to kind of get into the mind of the designer and go, oh, I can see why that's abstracted. Because if you come in and, there are people that, and I've seen some of the, I don't want to overstate it, hate that you've gotten with Undaunted, because it's not a war game. And I'm like, I'm not going to go on a full rant, but I think they missed the point of what you're doing with that particular game. And yeah, that one's not as historically accurate. But I can tell you, I have Undaunted. I've got the North African, so the second version, and I got the solo, which I'm going to be doing more on my channel. I am a victim, and I've told people this, of the shiny object syndrome. And just getting back into the hobby after 2 years, and your point about the golden age, I am literally a kid in the candy store. There are so many games and not enough time.
Yep.
Literally.
I know.
And so my point, and I apologize. One of the things we do on this podcast is we wander. We go off topic, we come back. So
no, I'm with you.
Cool. Cool. Let me ask you this. So we had Mark Walker on, and one of the things that he said, which mimics some of what you were saying, is it was a fun challenge. The constraints, which kind of force us as designers to think within a box, and what can we do within that box. But also, and I'm asking kind of as a customer service question, did part of the allure come from the fact that it was a jam and wasn't a contest? I mean, as a professional like yourself, you have nothing to prove. And so it's not like, hey, David Thompson entered a contest and didn't win, or he won it. Because it's a jam, I think that was alluring. Is that a fair statement? Or
for this one, that wasn't so much. So I've participated in 2 different design jams, right? So yours, and there was a Consim design jam that was done a couple of years ago that Fred Serval essentially ran, and it was essentially through GMT, right? I mean, it was very much like a coin crowd kind of thing.
Well, you have like a weekend, right? Where you
had a weekend. You had a weekend. And so that one, the draw was, well, there was 2 things. First, I did it with my kids. So my kids now they're 14, 12, and 9. So at the time, they'd probably have been like 12, 10, and 7 or something like that.
Okay.
But I said, hey, we're gonna have this weekend. We're gonna make a game together, and we did. We completed a game for the jam. But the big draw for that one was it was 3 days, right? There was a beginning to end, and I knew that I didn't have time to do more than that.
Yeah.
For yours, the fact that it was a design jam, certainly, like, I enjoyed seeing other people's work, and I enjoyed being part of a larger community, right? But in terms of like winning or anything like that, that really wasn't a big part of it. It was probably more just like being part of that community, because the community was so active on Twitter, right? There was so much activity on Twitter where we were all like kind of tagging it and sharing, and it just seemed like a fun experience to be part of. I think that was probably the biggest draw.
Okay. And the reason I ask is, you know, we're doing one now with cards, and we talked earlier, and I plan to continue to do at least 2 a year. And I'm a big believer, and I mentioned this to you about be the change you want to be. And when I looked at game design contests, especially, and again, I'm not knocking anybody. This is just my opinion and how I can address that actively. But a lot of game design, one, I'm not a big fan. I don't think game design is a competition. I don't think it needs to be. I think it's an art, dare I say that, and there's a craft to it, and it doesn't need to be, hey, I'm first, you're second, you're third, and you're honorable mention. I think that does it designers it's a little unjust or a little unfair, in my opinion. And so, and the other thing is, oh, you got to start with a fresh design. I mean, let's be realistic. I've got like 500 game designs in my head. And some of them are in various stages of prototype and concept, whatever. I mean, and I'm saying 500, it's not quite that many. But the point I'm making is to then go into a game design contest with a fresh new idea. If I'm being honest, I could probably do, but I'm working, and like you're probably working on other games. So if I can go into, and this is what we do with this jam, is you could have a game that you've worked on for 20 years and just have never finished. And if this is the impetus for you to finish it, then I've accomplished what I want to do, which is to get you back into working on your game, whatever it happens to be. And so that was kind of the genesis of what I was doing here. And it's nice to see that people like yourself and Mark Walker got involved.
Yeah.
So
no, that's absolutely the case. I mean, it's strange. I mean, there are design competitions, and that's fine. You know, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it is strange because when you think about it, no other part of our community or hobby or whatever competes like that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this hobby, for better or worse, is it's basically not like a legitimate industry, right? It's a bunch of friends that just happen to be making stuff and buying each other's stuff. And so, like, it's a very strange thing to all of a sudden become hyper competitive about it, right? When you look across all the other people making games and you're like, oh yeah, these are all my buddies.
Agreed. I mean, a fact that you and I are actually talking. A number of years ago, I picked up Undaunted, and I will admit, I buy a book because of its cover. And when I saw Undaunted, at the time, I knew nothing about you. I knew nothing about the game. It was World War II, which I'm interested in, and it had some amazingly cool, unique art. And if nothing else, I wanted to own a box with that art on it. Even if the game totally sucked, I had a cool piece of a piece of art. And now, obviously, in my opinion, the game doesn't suck. I've had a lot of fun playing it. My problem is my cats with those tiles. That board gets destroyed very quickly when one of them comes flying onto the table. So that's my problem that I have. But the point being is, I love that stuff, right? And so to see these types of games being designed, for me, and I've lost my point, so I'm going to just stop rambling. But so let me ask you this, and again, if this is something you don't want to talk about, you don't have to. But I'm curious what the next or the future is for your battle cards, because when I originally saw that, I'm an entrepreneur by trade. I've been in a number of startups. I run a small business. I'm blah, 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 blah. But when I saw that, my brain went, oh, Battle Card. I love that name. That could be branded. I could see multiple games coming out. And lo and behold, you've teased. So what can you tell us about your plans with the Battle Card brand?
Yeah, I can't remember. It wasn't long after we were done with Market Garden. And originally it was not Battle Card Market Garden. I forget the exact name we had for it originally, but it changed. And so, Nils and I talked about it, and we both said, hey, we had a ton of fun making it, which was, number one. And did we think we could use the general system, which is to say like an area movement, using dice as units with attrition and that kind of stuff, could be applied to other things. And of course, at operational scale, it seems relatively applicable to other conflicts, other battles, at least in World War II, if not beyond that. And we both agreed we thought it would be, and then we'd like to continue working on other things. And so we started like bouncing around a bunch of ideas, and we each kind of went away and we came back and we said, what about this battle and this battle and this battle? And we sketched out, over really, December, January, we had, I think, sketched out like 5 or 6 different possible things, right? And so I can't talk about them all. I will say, so it's August 17th right now. I think if all things go according to plan, August 29th there'll be an announcement, like an official announcement about the future of Battle Card. It's with a publisher, so it won't just be us doing it, right? So we'll be working with a publisher. It will be generally the same format, right? The series will be generally, and it will be a series of games. And I've teased enough that I think that we've teased the fact that the Malaya campaign is one of the games in the series, right? So we're pretty much done with the full series of them, right? The designs are pretty much complete. We've been tweaking them, fine tuning them. We've been working a lot with the publisher over the last couple of weeks to tweak it in preparation for the announcement. So we're at a pretty late stage at this point, right? So I would say within a couple of months, people will be able to play some other Battle Card games.
I love that. Oh my God. I'm seriously, that's amazing that little conversation I was telling you about with Nicola. And I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. If I'm not, you work with him on, God, the submarine game.
Yep, by Stealth and Sea.
Thank you.
Yep. And he's amazing, by the way. To work with. Because you chat with him. Yeah,
we've become. Can you call people Twitter friends? We're Twitter friends.
Yeah, I think so.
Our ex-friends now. I'm not. It's still Twitter
ex-friends. Yeah, I don't know what that even means.
Well, right? That comes out. That didn't even sound
friends
right
anymore.
We're ex-friends. Yeah, no, now that has a whole new meaning. But that's just crazy. That again, when I saw that, my first thought was because of who you are and the art, and again. People that watch our show regularly know the affection we have for Niels. We bubble over about his stuff a lot, and I'm not. I'm not going to apologize for any of that. But so now you've got okay. So we've learned at least, guys, there's multiple designs that are going to be published by a publisher, and that's just amazing. I love that. So that will be your third series. Outside of what is it? And I have my notes here because I always forget the Valiant Defense. I don't know why I can't remember that. Was that your first series of games that you did?
Oh, that's interesting. So, it depends on how you view it, right? It's all in perception. So, Undaunted was designed before any of the other things that I've worked on. So, I think when you talk about in terms of like series of things, you would view Undaunted, War Chest, and Valiant Defense as the 3 things, right? Each of those have multiple titles in the series, right? And War Chest is like an abstract game, not a war game. But Undaunted, the design for it was completed before the games in the Valiant Defense series, but Pavlov's House was published before Undaunted. So it just depends on whatever your view is.
When you were designing Pavlov's House and Undaunted, was that with the idea of a series in mind, or was it we're designing a game that we like, and then based on the popularity, hey, let's make a series out of this? I
Yeah.
mean, how'd you go into
So
that?
yeah. So in both cases, the answer is no. I've never gone into a design. I mean, now there's times like I have a game that just it previewed at Gen Con earlier this month called General Orders. This with Osprey, and it'll be wide release in October. And now going into that game, knowing that Trevor and I, who Trevor is the co-designer on
Mhm.
Undaunted, um, we know the success of Undaunted. We know that Osprey is a big publisher. So there is some knowledge going in that, hey, this might turn into a series. It's not an
Okay.
expectation that it will, but there's knowledge that it might. When I designed Undaunted, and so this is even more complicated. So Pavlov's House was the first published in the Valiant Defense series, but a game, Castle Itter, was designed before it. And that's a really strange, like, Castle Itter was signed by Victory Point Games, and then they never published it. In the meantime, DVG published Pavlov's House and blah blah blah. But the point is, when I was designing Undaunted Normandy and when I was designing Castle Itter, in neither case did I expect that, hey, these would become series games, right? That evolved from. In each case, it evolved differently, right? For
Okay.
Castle Itter, it was, hey, I finished the design, and there was a lot of interest from the community. It was at the time it was just a print and play game, and so I said, hey, this seems to be well received, and I reached out to the community on Board Game Geek, and I said, what other game would you like to see that kind of leverages some of the systems in this?
Okay.
And the Pavlov's House was a recommendation. For Undaunted, this is a little bonkers. Osprey signed Undaunted Normandy, and before it was published, they felt strongly enough about the game that they actually commissioned Undaunted North Africa, and the design for it was complete before Undaunted Normandy was published, which is really unusual, right? To
Yeah.
have the sequel designed before the first one's published, but they felt strongly enough about it that they felt comfortable commissioning it.
So from a designer's point of view, because that's the majority of our audience, right? Um, what would your I'm not going to ask you for your number one tip. That's kind of you have advice to share, and we're not going to put numbers on them. But as you're going in and dealing with DVG and you said Victory Point, where you probably had some sort of agreement in place that for whatever reason we don't need to know didn't work. I mean, that happens in business all the time, right? And then you ended up with DVG, and then you somehow got into contact with Osprey Games. So was that you reaching out and saying, "Hey, I've got games," or did it come, or is it a combination where maybe some of them reached out to you? Because if you're a designer, say like myself, who has no name, I
Yeah.
mean, obviously I have a name. My mom calls it, uses it a lot, but in the design space, right? So for those designers out there that maybe want to follow in your path to some degree, how do they build those relationships with publishers and get to be known to where they can get something published? I mean,
Yeah.
at the end of the day,
Yeah.
some of us want to accomplish that.
Yeah. So a few things. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
When I first started designing, this is about 2014ish or so. I really didn't know what I wanted to make. I started kind of flirting with design ideas, really right around the same time I got into board gaming in general. Right, it was
Oh,
right
really?
afterwards. Yeah, and I came to board games through RPGs. So I mean, I'm 44 now, so I started playing board games when I was like in my early 30s.
Dude,
Right?
you look like you're 38.
Oh. The camera, I have like a filter on my camera there. But so when I mean that first period, now Undaunted was one of the very first designs I started working on from a design perspective, but it took years before it was published. But I didn't really know what I wanted to make or what I was doing or anything. And so I was super fortunate that I just happened to move to Cambridge, and there was a very established designer and playtest group there. and with some established designers, and they are the ones who helped me get to how do you pitch to publishers and going to Spiel to do it, that kind of stuff. So for the first few years of my design life, I was doing the going to Spiel and meeting with publishers and pitching them games.
Oh, really?
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like the first games that I had published, like there's a game called Orc Olympics and Armageddon. Those were very much born and Undaunted and War Chest. Those were born of what you would think of as a traditional model of you schedule a meeting with a publisher, you meet with them at a convention, you pitch them the game, they take the game back, they say they like it, and it takes 3 years to publish it, right?
Okay.
Now, there's two things to take away from since then. Like you said, so I've been relatively successful with games like Undaunted and games like War Chest. So I'm fortunate now that publishers will oftentimes come to me and say, hey, we want you to work on a game for us. So I don't have to pitch games anymore, which I'm super blessed. But
you've earned that. I mean, let's be honest, you've earned that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you put in your time and you're. But here's the important thing. That barrier to first of all, the barrier to entry for pitching to publishers is already low anyway, because even if you're a first-time designer and you're pitching to the biggest publisher, you could pitch to Asmodee, you could call them up and email them, and you can schedule a meeting at Gen Con and you can go pitch to them. So the barrier to entry to meeting with a publisher is pretty low regardless. But especially in the war game space, that ability to reach out and touch a publisher is the threshold, it's pretty low, right? So if folks are watching and they're interested primarily in the historical game or the war game publishers out there, they're not going to have a problem. Now, here's the deal. Don't go with, a half-baked idea or I have a concept. You need to have an actual game designed, right? And I have a lot of people who reach out to me and they ask me questions about contracts and they ask me questions about all this stuff, and that's important stuff. But oftentimes people they're worried about or NDAs or copyright and all this kind of crazy stuff that doesn't matter, right? None of that matters. You just need to make a good game, a really good game, and you can get it in front of a publisher, and that's you need to do that first, right? Like you can talk, and I'll take all the time in the world to talk to anybody about anything, but you got to do that first. That has to be the first priority.
Yeah, in my professional life, I grew up in the Bay Area. I'm in San Diego now, and I mentioned to you I'm an entrepreneur, and ideas are cheap. Everybody has an idea. It's about execution, and if you're going to go talk, and I've been fortunate enough to be rejected by a number of venture capitalists for some business ideas. But nobody wants to hear your idea. I think is the point you're making is if you can show up to the party and you've got a game that, and I think Mark Walker talked about this, that's as complete as you can make it, whatever that skill set you have. That's what you want to present. You don't want to say, hey, I've got this really cool idea. It's Undaunted in Napoleonics. Yeah. Okay. And right. Is that a fair enough statement that you really want to have your design kind of working? I think so.
And, there was a period where when I was first designing, I thought, oh, well, I'll just work on the 70%, the 75% of the design, and the publisher will sign the game and they'll do all this development and stuff. And so I wasn't worried about all the last bit of it and the refinement and all of that. And that's just not the case. Like, you need to take them a good game, right? Because here's the thing, even though it's really easy to get in front of a publisher and pitch them a game, they're going to have a ton of submissions, right? Yeah. And so you need to put your best first impression, out there, right? It needs to be as good as it could possibly be. So yeah, you need to spend your time on that, not worrying about all the other sort of ancillary stuff.
No. Yeah. In your particular case, is it fair to say? I mean, Mark Walker talked about working with. My God, the spotlight's on, and my brain just froze. His Civil War. He just did a Kickstarter on. He was saying that the designer. They're going to kill me when they see this, that I forgot his name. But basically, so the point of my question is that you think you're at a point now where, because you have proven that you can deliver on time with a quality product, that maybe that bar is a little lower for you if you went to somebody and said, hey, I've got a, thank you, Mike, Herman Leffman.
Oh yeah, Herman Leffman, of course.
Yeah. What is, okay, Mike, you're my backup here, boss. What's his Civil War title that they published? Because Mark was basically saying that him and Herman talked about it, and he was like, yeah, that's fine. I know he's going to deliver.
Yeah,
I think I would, as an outsider looking in, think that maybe you're at that level that if you had an idea, that you could probably get away with less than a most fearful sacrifice. Thank you. Yeah. How did I not get that? It's shameful. I have no shame, but that's shameful. So when you were pitching Night Witches, and I believe it's Full Circle is publishing that?
Full Circle, yeah, that's right. Yep.
Did I get that right? And so,
yep.
I mean, what was that process like? You've got a new designer you're working with, and by the way, I'm going to be at Histicon, the San Diego Histicon. I registered today, so I'm going to get to see her.
I'll be there.
Chance to play your guys' game. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yep.
Now, that particular topic, side note, I play World of Tanks, and they have a relationship with Sabaton, or there's a heavy metal band who actually did a song about the Night Witches.
Yeah.
So you're aware of it.
I'm allowed to. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say anything or not. But I think that Kevin Bertram with Fort Circle, so the owner of Fort Circle, has been in touch with them about the game. I think they're gamers. Sabaton is they're actually gamers, and there's a board games. There's a Sabaton board game. So there might be something. So there might be some like future crossover.
Oh my God! So we got it. We got an exclusive here. A little.
Hey, here's a really cool. We'll circle back to the actual conversation here in a second. But so I use the Game Crafter to make my prototypes. I don't know if you're familiar with the Game Crafter, right? So they're a print on demand service. And so Liz, who I'm obviously partnering with, co-designing Night Witches with. This is her first design. So she's not used Game Crafter before. And so when we were ready to take a prototype to Circle DC, which is Fort Circle's convention they held in DC for the first time this year, I used the Game Crafter to print the prototype. And so I had it printed, but I had it mailed to her, right? Because I wanted her to get it so she could take it to DC and blah, blah, blah. So somebody at the Game Crafter is a Sabaton fan because the project name was Night Witches. They took on the wrapping that they wrapped the paper in, they wrote lyrics for the Night Witches song from Sabaton on the paper that they wrapped the game in. So that was pretty awesome. That was cool.
Oh, that's nice.
So for your question, it really did. I mean, this is the generic answer, right? So the question was basically like, does the threshold for me pitching change because I'm an established designer or whatever?
Yeah.
And so the answer is it depends on the publisher. So I mentioned this before. There are some publishers like I had a game recently that I designed with Trevor Benjamin and Roger Tankersley called Resist, which is a game about the Spanish Maquis, right? And so the publisher, Salt and Pepper, came to me and they basically said, the owner of Salt and Pepper came to me. He's a big war gamer. He owns a Spanish board game publishing company. Historically, they had always done licensed games or localizations. So they would take other companies' games and they would turn them into, they would make a Spanish language version. But they wanted to start creating their own English and Spanish original games.
Okay.
And so he had reviewed a bunch of my games and he reached out and he said, "Hey, I just want you to make a game for me. It can be," and this is the thing we talked about before. There's no constraints, right? So I just created constraints for myself so I could actually make the game. So he just said, "Hey, I like your stuff. Can you make a game?" And that was great. And if I pitched to somebody like Osprey, and this kind of happened recently, where I pitched a game that was not as far along as otherwise it might be to them, I'm a known quantity to them, right? So they signed it. But if I go to somebody like Asmodee, or if I go to Cosmos or some big, especially big publisher, or maybe not in the war game space, I would be no different than anybody else. And this happened. I very, very seldom now, almost everything I do is either games that are in a series or war games that I'm working with a publisher at a time. So I don't make a lot of games anymore that I'll design that I need to ultimately pitch, right?
Okay.
And part of it is I just don't have time to do it, right? With working full time as a job and having a family, with the time I do have for board games, it's all taken up with stuff that's already on contract or already accounted for, or whatever.
Right.
But I did work on a game, and I pitched it to Aspenday when I was at Gen Con, and I just literally emailed them and scheduled a meeting, and I went up there, and it had to be a really good game, right? Because I get no preferential treatment, right? So I have one shot, and I just pitched it like I would have 7-8
Okay.
years ago.
So the certain
depends.
circumstances, yes, you can leverage your notoriety. In other cases, it doesn't really matter. That could be a little humbling, I would imagine, to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I don't know.
You know what?
I
That statement came across as that you have airs about you. I don't get that vibe from the experience that I've had with you on Twitter and talking to you. You seem to be very grounded and level-headed. So I apologize if that came off as, hey.
No. I know what you mean. I mean, it's difficult for me to assess because I do have essentially what people would call massive imposter syndrome. I struggle all the time with, and it's true. Like a new game comes out, right? So when Undaunted Battle of Britain just came out, or when General Orders comes out in a couple of months, or Witchcraft, right? Every single game that's released, I am super nervous, and it's like I can't. This is a problem. I can't just enjoy the game coming out and people playing it. There's going to be errors. People are going to hate it. Blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I mean, there's silly stuff like, I'm super blessed that I will get to work with some amazing artists. Like you mentioned, Roland McDonald's art on Undaunted, or
oh my God, yes.
Niels's work, right? Or for people that are familiar with Resist or the upcoming game Witchcraft, it's done by Albert Montes, who's like an award-winning comic book artist, right?
So not to interrupt you too much, but I'm friends with Zilla Blitz.
Yeah.
And he did a series on his channel. I'm still learning from him. I mean, he's next levels when it comes to YouTube content
awesome.
creators. Oh my God, yeah. I know you guys have a relationship, and I actually invited him on tonight, but he said he was on a plane. Oh. And I told him it's safer to be in a plane than on a plane. But yeah, we banter back and forth. When I got into and again, this is about him, but the point I was getting at is he introduced me to the Resist, and the art on that it's one of those games that I would buy for the art. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
It's got its own unique style, and it's beautiful.
Now here's the problem, right? So I'm super, super blessed to be working with artists like that. And I can't talk about who the artist is for Night Witches, but it is an amazing, amazing artist, right? Like somebody I thought I'd never in my life be able to work with.
Oh,
and
wow.
So that's pretty intimidating, right? As a designer, because people are going to literally buy the game for the art. And what you're thinking is like, somebody's going to buy Resist because the art is amazing, and they're going to play the game like, this is garbage. Well, at least it looks good, right? Like,
I'm guilty.
It's very intimidating.
Art.
Yeah, I do too.
Well, okay, let me modify that. I buy games for the art, but I also buy games based on topic and designer. And it's nice that we're in an environment now where we know who the designers are. And it's not just a game that's behind the shield or the facade of the company, and we don't know who the designers are. So it's nice to see who's working on something, because you as players, you understand what you're going to get on a lot of times, right? So let me ask you a couple of things. So I like I said, I kind of looked at some of the games you've designed over the last few years, and there's Witchcraft, which I know nothing about, and one called Cupcake Draft. Give me a little background on Cupcake Draft, because that sounds like a fun game to play with your kids.
So okay, so here's the deal. So this is like a long story. I'll try to make it short.
Oh no, we got time.
So the main person I pretty much at this point exclusively co-design. I don't really do anything by myself anymore. And so the person who I've worked the most with is Trevor Benjamin, right? So I work with him on Undaunted and War Chest, and the two of us work with Roger Tankersley on Resist and Witchcraft, etc. So right before, actually earlier today, I was online with Trevor working on a forthcoming game. So we spent a lot of time together. Well, the first thing we ever worked on together was a game that would ultimately go on to become Undaunted. But in the period of time, and it took from conceptualization to publishing, that was a 5-year period. So a lot
Oh my
happened
God,
in that period.
that's crazy.
Right? Yeah, it was a long time coming. But in the midst of that, I had an idea. I wanted to make a game that was essentially like a fantasy football game. And you would like draft players and put together teams and blah, blah, blah. Well, so I went to Trevor and we worked together on this game, and it morphed like all game designs do. It morphed a lot. And it eventually became a game that would go on to be called Orc Olympics, right? Orc, like as in like fantasy creature orcs, Orc Olympics. So, yep, there we go. So Meander Mike he's stolen my thunder here. So Brain Games is a publisher in the Baltics, and they signed it. They signed Orc Olympics, and they published it in 2016, 17, 18, I don't know, something like that, right? So maybe 2016, I'm not sure. And it came out, and it was fine. It was not one of my better designs. It was fine. It was absolutely average, right?
Okay.
And so, and this is the period, again, yeah. And so this is a period where my first published game came out called Armageddon, right? And these are games that are unlike anything else I've worked on, right? So again, I'm finding myself. What do I want to make? What am I good at making,
right.
etc. And so Orc Olympics is, like I said, I play with my kids all the time. It's fine. So Brain Games, the publisher, came to us a year or two ago, and they said, "Hey, we really still believe in this game design. We really like the game design. We want to retheme it." And so they've rethemed Orc Olympics, which is a game ostensibly about fantasy creatures competing in Olympic events, to making cupcakes. So they've rethemed it, and I guess they'll publish it. I'm not really sure that he even is ever going to come out, to be honest with
really?
you.
Okay.
They said that they wanted to publish it. I think they previewed it at Nuremberg, which is a massive toy and like trade show,
right.
Last year, I think. I don't really know if it's ever going to come out. We'll see. I'm not sure.
Interesting.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So things just,
I saw that and I went, okay, that is about 180 degrees on the compass from what you might think David Thompson's doing in the wargaming community.
I think you're the first person that's ever asked me about it. So you were digging deep. Good job. Good job.
Well, we talked earlier. It's easy for me to ask the basic questions everybody asks you, and it's like, that's boring, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of ask about some of the, because what it shows, and one of the reasons why I brought it up, not just to be unique, but also as a designer, you don't pigeonhole yourself into, I only do historic war games. I've done other types of games, and I enjoy designing these types of games, and some of them may be published, some of them maybe not. Let me ask you this. So many of us have a small stack of unfinished designs. What's on the top of your stack, if you can talk about something that maybe you've struggled with that you can't quite get to work, or isn't a theme, or one of those that you just can't quite make work? Do you have one?
Yeah. I don't know. So I don't know. I mean, I certainly have a stack of games that I've thought about, and they haven't had time to work on them, or I started and they this again, in recent years, I haven't had the luxury to really start on something that I couldn't finish because everything was, you know what I mean? Like if there's a forcing function, like, hey, this is on contract, we have to deliver a game or whatever. I can do this. How about instead of that, I'll tell you the games I wish I had the time to work on.
That was going to be a follow-on question, is what is your Moby Dick? What's the game that you haven't designed that you would like to see under your credit list?
Yeah. So here I have a couple. So one is, I told you I'm 44, which means I was born in 79. I'm a child of the 80s. So growing up in the 80s, I grew up with Transformers. I grew up with G.I. Joe. Those were my formative years, right? So when people talk about Transformers and they have all these crazy, I guess, Michael Bay movies, I think is who makes them. Like that doesn't do anything for me. When I think of
Okay.
Transformer movie, I think of like the 1985 animated movie.
Exactly.
But
Yeah, that's
right,
Transformers for me as well.
right.
Although I
Right.
graduated
So
high school in '79.
it's okay. All right. Okay. Well, that's fine. So it was a little young for you, right? But for me, that was it. So I also grew up on the GI Joe comic book. Okay. And the
Okay.
comic book was actually a really good comic book. Like it wasn't kiddie-ish like the show was, right?
Hmm.
And so there was a plot line in the comic book where all the different sort of bad guy factions are fighting amongst themselves, and the
Hmm.
GI Joe team is there, like kind of allying. Like it's a weird sort of semi co-op situation. And so that's one thing is there's one specific storyline in the GI Joe comic books that I would love to turn into a board game, and I actually reached out to Renegade Games, who has the license for GI Joe, and I said, I mean, basically, I would design this game for free. Like,
Oh
just let
wow.
me make this game for you, please. And they've already got everything lined up, so they've got no time for me. That's fine.
I
But
think they're
that would
actually
be
based in
one.
San Diego too.
Oh, are they? All right.
I
So
think
when I come out
Renegade
to SD,
is.
I'm gonna go to their offices when I'm out there for SD HisCon. I'm like, I'm not leaving
Oh,
until
wait. Are you going to be here for San Diego in November?
I am.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to buy you a beer. Do you drink beer?
I do drink beer. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to
Yeah.
buy you a
Yeah.
brew, my friend.
Yeah.
We're going to
No,
get to meet.
that'll be
I'm looking
awesome.
forward
I'm
to it.
looking forward to it. I'm not going to play any games, and that's going to be fine. I'm just going to be hanging out with people the whole time. It's
Oh,
going to be
awesome.
great.
Well, we'll definitely. I'll
Yeah.
definitely. I'm going to have my T-shirt. Yeah, we'll meet. I'm
Oh,
looking.
no, that's
Oh, that
awesome.
you made my
That's cool.
day. You made my
No,
day.
I'm looking forward. I can't wait.
Yeah.
So that's one. Right.
Okay.
Another one is so I'm a Star Trek fan, right? And so Star Trek Deep Space Nine, there was a series, a thread in the early seasons with a group called the Maquis, which is essentially like a resistance group. And there's this whole storyline where the Federation is trying to stop them from doing terrorist attacks and blah, blah, blah. So there's this whole like sort of super political, almost Cold War kind of multi-faction thing. And I do play coin games. I'm not the hugest coin fan, but I envision some sort of like multi-faction coin style game would be a good fit for that. So
Okay.
those are the kind of like it's crazy because I'm as we've discussed, but most people probably know me for my war game stuff, but neither of those are war game directly, right? But both of them kind of have some adjacency to the ideas. So.
Well, yeah. Well, again, you're not pigeonholed, at least for yourself with what you're designing. So Warmut is a friend of the channel, and unfortunately, the young man lives in Arizona, and I think his brain is warped by the sun there. He's not quite East Coast. He's not quite West Coast. He's a little lost.
So he's singing. I mean, I'm Voltron's Thundercats. I'm there for it. I love it all. I grew up on all of it.
Well, it's interesting. So you said you started designing games was it 14?
Basically 2014, yeah.
So 9 years. There's a number of us who have designs that are 20 plus years old that have not been published. So clearly we're doing this wrong.
So it's really strange. I told you I grew up on RPGs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was when I was around 10, 11, 12, I started playing RPGs and mostly D&D, a lot of other stuff, but that was pretty much what it was. And this is so silly. When I got married and had kids and stuff, I was like, oh, I don't have time for this anymore, so I'll play board games instead. And I had no idea what I was thinking. So that's how I came to board games, is from RPGs, thinking I needed to have a different hobby. But before I switched over to board gaming from RPGs, I was actually working on a design, and that design would ultimately go on to be called what's called For What Remains, which is published by DBG. It's a sci-fi, like, skirmishy kind of war game, right?
Okay.
But that game preceded my introduction to board gaming, right? And so it drew from things like Blood Bowl and D&D and that kind of stuff, what I knew of. And so I had this idea that was essentially what we would now think of as like a miniatures board game hybrid kind of thing. So before I really got in, and that one did take me a long time. So I mean, that was like in the mid 2000s I had started on that.
Okay.
And I'm fortunate that it took so long, because by the time it got published, I had discovered war games. And so I actually sort of reworked a lot of the systems, integrating things like chip pull and counter stacking and stuff like that into the game, which made it way better.
Nice. So, oh my God, I had a question and I lost it. I've got like 5 things going on in my head that I want to ask you, because there's so much. Before I continue, we're an hour and 10 minutes in, just to give you a heads up, because I know you said you had about an hour. So
Yeah.
we can continue again. If you need to take off, we could have you back another time, talk about whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, this is good stuff, but I just want to kind of give you the clock.
Yeah, I'm
So.
probably like we talked about, probably good for another 10, 15 minutes or so.
Okay.
That's okay.
So why don't we do this? I want to let me kind of look at my notes here real quick. One of the things that I find interesting is, and I'm going to kind of wrap this. You can unpack it so that you can, and I'll shut up and you can, you can respond. But how do you stay focused to get your designs done? I think that's critical, because that's one of the things that I suffer from, because again, I chase the shiny objects. I'd like to get your thoughts on the kind of a movement that we're starting to see with KDP and book publishing, or book games like what Worthington has done. And if you've got any desire or designs that might be in that arena, and I'll just stop there. So, because you can probably kind of dive a little deep, but I'm curious as to how you stay focused.
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's 2 keys to staying focused for me. There's 2 separate things, but they work well together. So one is, it's really useful for me to have deadlines. Right now, it's best if those deadlines are legit external deadlines. Like, I'm working with a deadline that a publisher has provided me. And there's some publishers that I work with, like Osprey, who are extremely deadline driven, right? They will tell me this is the deadline and I have to meet that deadline. So that's just a good, forcing function. Honestly, the looser the publisher is, the worse it is for me, right? Because there's no impetus for completion. And so it can become the lower priority.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, and I mentioned this before, co-designing. So there's a lot of benefits. We could have an entire multi-hour discussion on the benefits of co-designs. There's not a lot of drawbacks, but there's a lot of benefits. But one of the core benefits, and now a little bit of this is personality based, so not everybody's made the same, but for me at least, and I think a lot of people share this, it helps me hold myself accountable if I'm meeting with a co-designer on a game. Right. So usually what I'll do, it depends on the co-designer. Everyone is different. Every relationship is totally different. But oftentimes when I meet with somebody, I'll schedule the next meeting at that meeting. And so I know that before we meet again, these are the deliverables that I have to accomplish. And if I don't do them, then I'm letting my partner down. Yeah. Right. So that partnership helps hold me accountable.
A little peer pressure.
So I think. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think those 2 things, deadlines, even if they're self-imposed, like let's say you're making a design to pitch to a publisher, so there's no external deadline. I think if you just have those deadlines yourself, and if you have a co-design. Now, the other thing you can do too is, it doesn't have to be a co-design. You can be meeting with, and I encourage people to do this, you can be meeting with a design and playtest group on a recurring basis, right? Mm-hmm. There's tons of in-person meetings, meetups. There's online meetups. Meet with them, and that'll say, okay, we're going to meet every other week, and by the time we meet again, I have to have the next iteration of this design done. Okay, right? So that's the goal.
And I don't think you mentioned kind of the obvious is just discipline, which nobody wants to hear.
Now here's something. This is a me thing. Everybody's got different times, different schedules, different ways they work, etc. For me, every single morning, pretty much every morning, I would say, at least 6 days out of the week, I get up and I work on game design for a couple hours a day before I go to work. So if I was to miss that, like let's say I sleep in, let's say I oversleep, right? So I usually get up right around 4, right? And I work until 6. right? So if I miss that, I feel guilty, like to myself, right? Not to somebody else. Not I haven't missed a deadline. Like this is,
Right.
this is something I'm serious about. This is the time I've set aside to do it. So this is my, me holding myself accountable. So I'm not saying that everybody needs to have that schedule, certainly, but if you can just schedule, if you're really serious about getting a design done, if you can just say, I'm going to work on it 30 minutes a day, and this is the time I'm going to do it. It's whatever, 8 to 8:30 at night or midnight or whatever time works for you, whatever time you're creative and you have the juices flowing and you're disciplined about doing it.
Mm-hmm.
If you could just meet that recurring schedule, that's a huge help.
Yeah, I don't think we need to candy coat it, right? At the end of the day, a lot of this is self-discipline. And that's going to allow you to finish your designs and accomplish your goals. I mean, that's true of most things in life, right? And in your case, now I noticed that you use Tabletop Simulator quite a bit. I've just been exposed to it, and oh my God, that's such a wonderful tool. And when I'm on Discord, and I know we're on a couple of channels together, I'll see your name, you're online, but it'll say playing Tabletop Simulator, and I just assume that you're creating the next great game.
I'm creating a game. It might not be the next great game, but there's an A game going on.
Okay, let me be a fanboy. Let me be my fanboy, please.
It's another crash and burn, and I'm like, okay, we can delete that file. But I mean, yeah. So Tabletop Simulators, I spend way too much time inside it. That's where I do all my design work. Literally, probably 97% of my design time is spent in Tabletop Simulator. Mostly because it speeds up iteration, right? I can iterate quickly in there rather than the physical.
So for me, at least before Tabletop Simulator, I would come up with an idea. Now, what I've noticed with a lot of my designs, they tend to be card-driven heavy. It's not like what I try to do. It's just what I apparently do. But what I'll do is I'll come up with a concept or an idea, and then I've got my paper cutter and I've got a stack of cardstock, and I'm cutting and snip, and I have a clipper and I round off the corners of my cards. Hate me. I do that with my hex encounters too, because I'm strange like that. But my point is that I will try to get a prototype that I can start to play with. And what I've discovered with Tabletop Simulator is I can do that faster and make changes quicker, which allows me to focus more on my designs. And it seems like that's something. Do you go straight from idea into Tabletop Simulator, or do you make any old-fashioned crafted prototypes any longer?
Nope. The only time I make a physical prototype now is when I'm testing the ergonomics of the design, right?
Okay.
So
yeah,
that is super important, right? And you can tell there are games that are being made now, designed and published, that you can tell, like, oh, no one actually tested this in person because of XYZ reason, right? So that's super important, but it doesn't, until I'm ready to say this design works, the actual design work, I just need to test the ergonomics of it now. I won't make a physical prototype unless it's something like, I told you, Liz, that I took a copy to Circle DC or something.
Well, yeah, you've got outside forces that kind of force you to do. When I say force, you could have chosen not to do that, but obviously there's benefits into having a physical copy. And I would imagine that when Liz got that, she was over the moon.
I think so. I hope so. Yeah. It was awesome.
Well, I mean, what was it like the first time you had a design? Now, okay, I'm going to end up pushing you as long as I can. You might be here 2 hours, so bail when you need. Pull the cord when you need to. But what was it like when you got that first design, a physical copy in your hands? What do you remember that experience, and what was it like?
Meaning the prototype or like a published design?
Well, either or, because I think both of them are for your first time. It's a bit of a landmark kind of thing, right? Yeah.
So, I mean, the first prototype is super nebulous, right? Like we were kids probably making prototypes, and you know what I mean? Like, but as far as like getting one from the game crafter, it's hard to remember, or whatever. It's hard to remember this, so it apparently didn't stand out enough. I probably well, no, that's not true. Here, this is a good lesson learned for anybody that's watching that's starting to get into design.
Yeah.
This is a super cliche thing that you'll be told constantly, like, don't spend a bunch of time on art and blah, blah, blah. Get the design out in front of people. I think that a lot of people like taking the time to like integrate cool art and stuff like that. So I'm not nearly as hard on people with that kind of stuff, because a lot of people just like to spend time making it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's fine. What I will say is that early on, I would work on a design and I would be confident in it conceptually. I would conceive it. I would be confident in it. I would actually order like a prototype from the game crafter. It would come, and then I would take it to a playtest group, and it would crash and burn immediately. I'm like, well, I just spent like, whatever, $15-20 and a bunch of time, and I'm just going to throw this in the bin. And that's a problem, because you might be, even if subconsciously, resistant to changing it at that point. Right?
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So you really don't want to be doing any of that sort of like, print and play productions or GameCraft or whatever. You don't want to be doing any of that stuff until you're, no kidding, pretty close to being done with the design, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Now, for myself, I've done enough of the crafting that I've crafted stuff that doesn't work, and I have no problem trashing it, because I've learned to disassociate.
Yeah, but you're making it for yourself, right? You're physically making it yourself, right?
Yeah, because I like the crafting aspect, right?
Yeah.
Now,
yeah,
I use GameCrafter for my Mythic game, my Bigfoot game. And at some point when I get that to, and it's pretty much a finished design, and I'll reach out to you privately, but I would love to send you a copy that you can play with your family and give me some honest feedback, because I think it's a family type of game. And it's a total board game thing, and that's another discussion for another day. I've mentioned that to you. So let's dive in a little bit on your thoughts on KDP, which is Kindle Direct Publishing through Amazon, and things like Mike Lambeau, Worthington Press, and Historic Wings, which also entered into the Game Jam, and I'm going to be playing one of their book games starting on the 21st, and putting it on the channel. But what are your thoughts with that format, and have you thought of or have any designs that you could talk about that might be in that particular sphere of our or part of our hobby?
Yeah, so I've got a bunch of Mike's games. I played them. I love them. I think Mike's a badass. That's his title, badass.
There we go. I love it.
They're cool. They're really cool. They're like perfect. They're absolutely perfect for like what he's set out to do. Right? Mm-hmm. Like just get the book and get going fast, and they're awesome. I haven't played any of Worthington's. I know of Worthington's games. I've looked at some of them. I've thought about getting some of them. I haven't pulled the trigger. And truth be told, the dark secret for me is I play games literally once a month. So that's not true. I work on game design stuff. Mm-hmm. I play some stuff with my kids. But if it's not those two things, at best, I have a game group that meets once a month. At best. Usually it's once every other month. Okay. So I don't play a lot of games. So some of Mike's stuff I've taken like on a plane or whatever, and I'll get a chance to play it. But that's kind of it. So that's why I haven't pulled the trigger on any of the Worthington stuff. I just haven't had time. I think it's awesome. I think it's really cool. I think that I think Mike has started selling some of his stuff on like drive-through, right? Like the drive-through RPG.
I didn't know that. I'll have to look into that. I've got his stuff from Amazon.
Yeah, I think that he started because everybody kept asking him all the time, can you upload PDFs or whatever to BGG? And obviously, I think at first, Mike, and I don't want to speak for him, but I think he might have been a little bit resistant, rightfully so, that like, well, people just download the thing. Why would they not buy it then? But I'm pretty sure, Working Vault. There we go. Thank you. So, so I think now you can get them digitally, and that's even better because you can just display it on your iPad and like draw on the iPad. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of opportunity there. So
yeah, well, you can also print an unlimited number if you want to do the print and play aspect. Where
that's right.
Putting it on Amazon, if you were to consume that product and you wanted more, you'd have to buy another copy. So I can see where the reluctancy comes in because you're kind of cannibalizing that, potentially cannibalizing that product.
Yeah. Yep. But I think they're brilliant. I've thought, man, this is a really cool idea. If I was to do something, what would I do or whatever? But I've not. Again, this is sort of a limitation of time, right? Like I just haven't had time to work on it. And I mean, truth be told, like part of me is like, it's not Mike's thing. Other people are doing it. You've got the wording, but I think he's earned a space, like a niche, right? And I think part of me somewhere inside, it's like, I should be respectful for this. I don't need to, I've got other things going on. Why do I need to be making, books when other people are already doing it? And I mean, I don't always feel that way about everything, but you mentioned card driven games and specifically like CDGs, right? Like actual CDGs, not just games that are driven by cards, etc. I mean, I love CDGs. I love like 13 Days and Watergate. Those kinds of games are some of my favorite games to make. But when it came time for when I was starting to work on General Orders, which is, I mentioned it earlier, a game I've got coming out with Osprey soon, I wanted to capture that feeling that those like 30-minute, super tight, quick playing, super tense CDGs give me. But I started thinking about it. I'm like, why would I work on a CDG? Like those games are fantastic, and I don't need to add another one to the library of CDGs that are out there. And so that's what led me to go with in General Orders is what we call a worker placement war game, right? Because there's nothing like that out there, right? There's opportunity there for me to kind of feel like I have more room to create instead of trying to just kind of iterate on what's already come before it. And maybe that's not the right concept or approach or whatever. But
okay, honestly, I don't know if there is a right or a wrong. There doesn't need to be. And I'm not correcting you. I'm just throwing out my opinion. Yeah. I don't think we need to have what's right or wrong on how we design games. We design certain things, right? And that's how we explore and we find what works and what's fun. I talk a lot about, I like to design games around experience, which are less historic. Although the Coast Watchers game, I want to do it justice. I want to make sure the people that were involved kind of get their due, as it were, and bring light to historically as much as I can gather the truth, define truth how you will, into that game. So that's a new paradigm for me, is to do more of what you do, which is more of the research and the traditional historical type game, as opposed to my Richtofen game, which is a Hollywood air combat style game that isn't historically accurate, although there's enough history sprinkled in that you get the flavor. You think you're eating real meat, but it's tofu that's flavored just right.
Yep.
So anyway, we're at about an hour and a half, my friend.
Okay.
I'm not going to kick you out, but I don't want to abuse the time that you've given us, and I appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight. At some point, maybe in the future, we can have you on again and maybe dive into some of these topics a little deeper, because I really want the community to kind of hear what the non-famous designers are doing, and also people like yourself that are approachable, that can kind of give insight into what we do as a hobby, because in a lot of ways, it's still just a hobby for you. And I can see the passion and listening to you talk about what you do, and I find that very enlightening. Is there anything that you might want to? Come on, Warmutt. He's living in Arizona. He's like a second-class citizen. What can I say? But is there anything that you might want to impart on our audience on the game design side that maybe you didn't, that I didn't ask, or something that maybe you would like to share at this point?
Oh, wow. That's good. I mean, we've already talked about this, but I would just say, I talked a lot about the benefits of co-design. You don't have to co-design. You can absolutely design by yourself. What I would say is don't design in a vacuum, which is to say, find a community of other designers that you can play test with, people that you can bounce ideas off of. Spend your time like building up that network of people who you can go to and who are going to give you, honest feedback. Good, honest feedback. Yep. That's the most important thing, right? So, that's the number one piece of wisdom. And then, once you find that group, we're a small enough network that like you'll that's how you're going to meet people in the industry. That's how you're going to, get your foot in the door, all of those things. That's how you're going to learn everything. So yeah, I would say just reach out, and the beautiful thing, especially of just the war game space or the historical game space, is it's so small that everybody knows each other, and almost everybody is super willing to help each other out. Right.
Yes.
And so we're really just kind of one big group of friends. Right. So just take advantage of that network.
Nice. Well, I will add to that I didn't have a Twitter account until about a year ago, and I only talk about wargaming stuff. And I can say that it's been such a wonderful experience that I've met people globally that design games, have different ideas, and the support. And it's allowed me to meet somebody like yourself that, when I bought the game that you were designing, again, I bought it for the art. And lo and behold, today, which by the way is my birthday, I'm sitting here talking with David Thompson, which is like one of the best gifts I could have for my birthday. And again, I'm a fanboy, no shame. I love what you do. I love the fact, and I've said this before, that you're branching between kind of the old school war gamers to the board game. And I think we need more designers that are venturing into the spaces that you are. And I'm curious about a work replacement war game because I've had thoughts. And I will say this publicly: my goal in the next 3 years is somehow, some way that you and I co-design a game.
Oh, so there we go.
I'm going to put that out there.
We can talk about that at ST HISCON then.
Yes, we will. We will, and we'll share. And I'm totally looking forward to that. Yeah, guys, I should have just kept that to myself, but thank you very much. I'm super old. But David, again, I appreciate your time. I know we stayed a bit longer than what you had scheduled, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And at some point, I do want to talk to you about my Daunted game that I want to use your mechanics for the Christmas card jam coming up that deals with the Napoleonic battle of, I'm going to say this wrong, Hougoumont, the farm. I think totally works with your deck building kind of mechanic, and I'd like to see more I'm going to be honest, I'd like to see more war games designed around that mechanic. And I know there are more, and I'm going to shove this in really quick, and again, we can talk later about it, but I know there's more titles coming out for the Undaunted series, and we don't need to talk about that today, but my understanding is you've already got 3 or 4 games that are already in the queue for that. So Mike says lots of beer. I'm going to buy him a beer when I see him. I'm going to bring him some local juice. Anyway, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end the show with this. I don't think there's anything else I can ramble about for the next half an hour that's going to be of value beyond what David's done today. So with that, sir, again, I want to thank you for being here today and taking an hour and a half out of your busy schedule. Much appreciated. I do have one last question, though. Is it ever possible maybe to get Trevor Benjamin to join? I'll reach out to him. But he seems to be a bit of a mystery man.
He doesn't do a lot. Now, Dan Thoreau?
Space Biff?
Okay, so Dan he straddles a lot of different places, war games, but also the broader market. He's well known for his written content. Trevor's a big fan of Dan Thoreau's work, and so we actually just recorded a podcast with Dan. But it's very unusual for Trevor to do so. It's not that he doesn't ever do anything; it's just not something he enjoys a great deal.
Okay,
but you can always ask him. He's he won't. I don't know. I can't speak for him.
I'm going to ask him, and if I need to, I'm going to say that David will be there to hold his hand.
Sure. Yeah.
And not to put him on, put him out on the street, but I know I've talked with Niels, and he just said he's a little too shy to come on. And darn it, at least his art is amazing. But I would love to have conversations with him. Anyway, with that, guys, I'm going to go ahead and shut it down for tonight. Again, David, thank you so much. This is a fun conversation, and I truly look forward to seeing you in November when you travel out to San Diego.
Yeah, thanks
for guys. I'm going to go ahead and say goodnight, and we'll talk to you next week. I just got to remember how to shut everything off. I'm still a noob at this.